I light this candle on the altar to remember all those who have mothered us in our life. And yes, that can be something other than a female. Someone who has mothered us in our life, who is still with us, perhaps in the sanctuary, or perhaps they are no longer physically present to us. But as living spirits created by God, they exist, and we can call them forth in our memory and hold love in our hearts for them. And so we bring them into our awareness as we take a few moments to recognize what our Unity Daily Word called today motherly love. And you know, they say imitation is the highest form of flattery. So if you're still thinking about what Mother's Day gift will I get, think about echoing what you learned from your mother, what she taught you. And again, we're not talking about only biological mothers, but a significant individual in your life who has mothered you, nurtured you, encouraged you, spoke to you of the mother of the universe. That is the capacity of compassion and care that our mothers can teach us, sometimes directly by their example, and sometimes we've had family history where they've kind of taught us indirectly by how they've behaved, and we've learned from that. Today I want to continue my May lesson inspired by the book, How to Know a Person. And so today, if you're endeavoring to honor your mother, you might think of this line, how do I truly know her? And this book by David Brooks poses this one question: how do your ancestors show up in your life? Now, this is a complex query, so we're only going to work with a small but essential aspect. As individuals, we are shaped more by our culture and the time in which we live, or are we shaped more by our individual gifts? In other words, to what degree do our ancestors shape our lives, and to what degree do we create our life? If we consider the extremes of this idea, we may say, I am totally created by the culture and the time in which I live, and therefore my community will determine what my life will be. This is a perspective of some cultures throughout history. Or you might consider yourself a free thinker and reject, or at least do not consider, your cultural and ancestral context and live your life very independently. If we look at our world and our time, we know that for many in the American culture, in recent generations, there has been less and less focused on the family generations. And it's been brought down to that nuclear family. And then we've lived through a period where, does that nuclear family even still exist? Or are we creating new types of family? And I think, at least to me, that may suggest that we're living in a time that highly focuses on individuality. My life, it's all about James. But then we also live in a world in which at least advertisers and the media want to convince us that the world is doing many things to control us or make our life a certain way. So which is it? Which is it for you? For those you care about? Well, in our unity studies, if we get anything out of the 12 powers, the unity principles, and everything that we talk about, we learn from the essence of the Jesus teaching that it's a middle road of balance. We walk a life of balance. Jesus spoke of this in many ways, but I think all of us, even in 2025, here in the Midwestern part of the United States, we have this challenge to find balance in our lives. Is my life entirely of my own making? A woman once posed that question decades ago to Myrtle Fillmore, seeking advice, and Myrtle responded, "My dear, your life is not entirely of your own making. You live in a great network of consciousness." David Brooks speaks that as our culture and our time. We're part of something bigger than ourselves. We celebrate here in our church, don't we? Our spiritual community, that it has value and meaning to us. It helps support, shape, heal, guide our lives. It's not all about Reverend Stacey or Carlotta, although she danced beautifully. But we're all seeking to find a balance, not alone, but a balance together. Let me read from David Brooks' perspective in his book. The challenge in seeing, that is, getting to know a person, the challenge in seeing a person, therefore, is to adopt a kind of double vision. It means stepping back to appreciate the power of group culture and how it has formed over generations and then poured into the individual person. But it also means stepping close and perceiving each individual in the midst of their lifelong project of crafting their own life and their own point of view, often in defiance of their group's consciousness. The trick is to hold these two perspectives together at the same time. And you have to manage both of these things at a high level of complexity. One of the great fallacies of life is to think culture is everything. Another great fallacy is to think that culture is nothing. David writes on, I found it helpful to start with the idea that each of us exists in a state of givenness. Isn't that an interesting word? Givenness. Each of us can say, I am the receiver of gifts. I am part of a long procession of humanity, and I have received much from those who came before me. But people are not passive vessels into which culture is poured. Each person is a culture co-creator, embracing some bits of their culture, rejecting others, taking the stories of the past and transforming them with their own lives. Wow. Wow, wouldn't that be an ultimate Mother's Day gift? To take what you were given, how she birthed you into the world, and transform it into your unique, wonderful expression. Now that's a gift. So to see a person well, you have to see them as cultural inheritors and as culture creators. Here is this balance. I want to share a couple of short stories from ancient times and from my own time. Many of us know the classic story of King Solomon and his wisdom. 2 mothers came before him. They both had children, but unfortunately one child died. And in the night, that mother, with the dead child in her bed, went to the other mother, because they lived in a great group home, went to the other mother while she slept and exchanged the babies. So they came before King Solomon for judgment. And to make the long story short, he called for a sword, and he lifted the sword. "Let me cleave this child in 2, and half can go to each woman." And one woman cried out, don't, let her have the child, don't kill it." And King Solomon said, "You are the true mother." Why? Because her focus wasn't on having half of a possession. Her focus was on that baby living, having a life. And so King Solomon knew the mother that cried out, "Let it live," was the true mother of the living child. Well, now we'll just jump forward about 3,000 years to my time. I've shared this with you before, but I share it again as I cared for my mother, and especially her last days, the last week, the last few days. When someone is about to die in your arms, the words they speak are potent. You never forget them. And I had noticed in recent months that my mother often preceded "I love you" with the statement, "You are my son. I love you." Or "I love you, my son." But for a few weeks, she stopped referring to me as her son, and I was in the role of her caretaker. So here we were, before she took her last breaths, and she said, "I love you beyond all conception. I love you beyond all conception." And it wasn't just the words, it was what I felt, that she was seeing me now as something far greater than little James Jeffrey that she brought into this world. I was something much greater, something beyond conception. In this story, in a heartfelt way, it helps us to understand this dual vision, this capacity for seeing someone in 2 ways. One as a vessel of their culture and their time, and also as a unique, extraordinary individual. And we are both. And finding our way through that balance is our life challenge. It is our creating a life that knows. I told our musicians, particularly Christina on the violin this morning, wow. When she plays in a particular way I'll call Appalachian, it reminds me of the generations of both sides of my family that go way back to the east and to the Appalachian Mountains, and the type of music they brought from the so-called old country, and how it shaped their culture and their music. And even though I did not hear it in this lifetime, it is in my blood. And when she plays, I feel that march of the generations of Stacey's and Wise's that came together and eventually led to me. And yes, in my spiritual understanding, I know also that I am a divine creation of God, as each and every one is unique. But I am this composite of the family I entered, the family I have chosen, and my uniqueness. So there's much more I would like to say, but I want to do something different today. And rather than have an actual time in the silence of meditation, our ushers are going to pass out a sheet to you. And it's intended to help you create an image for your own time of meditation later today, later this week, whenever you have the opportunity for a little silence. And it gives you 3 images, and I invite you to study them, visually looking at them, and then hold the idea of them in your heart as you reflect on this dual nature that you are. A spiritual individuality and a valued part of a greater family, culture, generation, time. So we look at this first image at the top with a circle surrounded by dots. And it simply says, you see yourself at the center of the event with the other people as smaller dots around you. You are the principal actor. The others are mere extras. I was an adult. I won't even mention what age. My mother had passed. I found a letter she had written, probably almost 20 years before my birth. And more than the content and the story she was talking about, you know what amazed me? And I was an adult. I went, wow. Wilda had dreams. Wilda had a life, and it wasn't all centered around being James's mother. She was bigger than this image I had always carried of her. Oh, she's my mother. She brought me into this world. Wow, she had a life before I entered the scene. And so that's sort of like this first diagram, the big circle in the middle. That's me. Wonderful me. But again, it has that sense of it's all about me. And there are other people in my life that are just playing bit parts around that circle. The next image we move to, in the middle of the page, the center, me, grows smaller and smaller, and the periphery, the other people, grow in significance. They are no longer the extras I had thought them to be in my exaggerated estimate of self. They may go so far that the center, me, disappears completely, and the others become so much more real and important that I suddenly feel myself to be a mere nothing. Well, we go to the extreme and we let the outer world, people, tell us who we are, define our existence. Well, this is going the other direction. Now, little James is just a nothing. And everybody's going to set the boundaries of what he can be in this life. The third image, this is when we have reached a certain degree of emotional and spiritual maturity. And that's a plug for Reverend Phil Schmedstead, who's going to do a wonderful workshop in June for you on that subject of emotional and spiritual maturity. I've taken it. I want you to experience it. Mark your calendars, June 29th and 22nd and 29th. So this third one is the individual who has recognized, they're the dot in the center, they have recognized what we call the Christ within that's living with them is living in the others. And with that understanding, namaste. The Christ in me greets the Christ in you. In seeing that divine spark in myself and others, then my relationship to them not only achieves balance, but I begin to discover in these other lines the rich weaving together of our lives. Having my individual self, but also my life in the community. And I'll just end it with one last image, or in honor of our musicians, a movement. Rudolf Steiner gave us a movement that talks about this balance. We like to hug around here, don't we? So the O vowel in Rudolf Steiner's You're With Me is this coming together, this almost like hugging, joining with the other. And before you completely cut that off in a circle, you go to this gesture, the E vowel, which means I am. I am myself. So that simple gesture of joining with the other and defining the self. Joining with the other and defining the self is about this third diagram. This recognizing the sacred in yourself and the other, and there is an interplay, but you are not lost in the other, nor are you so egotistical that you forget the other. So let us continue our unity quest, this finding the middle path that Jesus spoke of, this balance in our lives of our own worthiness and importance, and the worthiness and importance that live with others who help shape our world together. And so I thank you for your willingness to have a different experience this morning. I invite our ushers forward, or not our ushers, excuse me, our musicians, to prepare for their next selection. And our ushers will come forward to receive our offering. Would you please bless it with me with our offertory statement together? God gives abundantly. I receive thankfully and give again generously. This is the bounty of God, and we send it forth with wisdom and joy. Hit it